two men in their 50s, sitting alone in front of a computer screen inside a prison in San Diego with two correctional officers standing behind them. Everyone else, the commissioners, the lawyers, the family, is watching from somewhere else. This is Erik Menendez, 10 hours. Then 1 day later, Lyle Menendez, 11 hours. 35 years earlier, these two men killed their parents with a shotgun in a house in Beverly Hills. That fact has never been disputed, not by them, not by anyone. But in 2025, something happened that had never happened in this case before. A judge looked at 3.5 decades of prison records, degrees earned, programs built, disciplinary files, and resentenced them, made them parole eligible, effectively told the state, these men have done the work. And then the parole board said no anyway. Not because the murders weren't real. Everyone agrees they were. The board said no after acknowledging almost everything the defense could have hoped for: the rehabilitation, the programs, the letters from prison staff calling them remarkable. They said no over 2 cell phones and a set of personality traits a commissioner described as lying beneath the surface. So here's the actual question this case forces you to sit with. Not did they do it. Everyone knows they did it. The question is this: if a person spends 35 years proving, by every measurable standard, that they've changed, does that matter? Or does the crime itself put a ceiling on what a person is ever allowed to become again? The evidence that changed everything for the brothers wasn't found by investigators. It was written by a 16-year-old boy in a letter years before the murders happened, and the man it was written to had already died by the time anyone found it. Stay with that, we'll get there. Go back now, all the way back. Beverly Hills, 722 North Elm Drive, a Sunday night in August. Warm, quiet street. Inside, Jose and Kitty Menendez are in the den watching television after dinner. Jose Menendez was an entertainment executive, the kind of man whose name opened doors in this city. Kitty was a former teacher, a mother of 2. On the surface, the family had everything a Beverly Hills address is supposed to represent. That night, their sons Lyle, 21, and Erik, 18, walked into that den with shotguns. Both parents were shot multiple times at close range. The brothers would later call 911, sobbing, telling police they'd come home from a movie to find their parents dead. For months, that story held. Investigators found no forced entry, no robbery. The scene didn't add up the way a stranger's crime usually does. But for a while, nobody looked at the sons. Here's what the brothers did in the months after the murders. They didn't run. They didn't disappear. They spent Rolex watches, Porsches, a $64,000 deposit on a restaurant, tennis lessons, acting classes. To the prosecution, that spending spree became Exhibit A, cold, calculated proof that 2 young men had killed their parents for the money, and then celebrated. But there's another way to read that same set of facts, and it's the read that would define this case for the next 35 years. The brothers didn't run. They didn't hide. They went shopping. To the prosecution, that was evidence of cold calculation. To the defense, it was something else entirely: 2 boys who had been controlled for so long that freedom itself felt unfamiliar, and a shopping cart was the only language they had for it. Which one was it? We'll come back to that. The brothers weren't arrested until March of 1990, 7 months after the murders. It happened because Erik had confessed to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. Oziel told his girlfriend. She went to police. Once the case reached trial, the defense built its entire argument on a single claim. The brothers said they killed their parents because they believed their lives were in danger. Years of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, mostly at the hands of their father. Erik alleged their mother was aware and at times complicit. Now, the psychological question. Why would two young men who claim to be escaping years of abuse respond to that escape by buying Rolexes and Porsches? Clinical literature on trauma response has an answer, and it's not intuitive. People who have spent years under total control, financial, physical, psychological, sometimes respond to sudden freedom with exactly the kind of behavior that looks, to an outsider, like guilt, spending, impulsivity, a hunger for things that were always withheld. It isn't proof of innocence, but it isn't proof of guilt either. It's a pattern trauma researchers have documented in survivors who never killed anyone. Then, in 2023, something happened that hadn't existed at either trial. Roy Rossello, a former member of the boy band Menudo, came forward publicly and alleged that Jose Menendez had drugged and raped him in the 1980s when Rossello was a teenager. It wasn't proof of what happened inside that house, but it was the first outside account that fit the shape of what the brothers had always claimed about their father. And then there's the letter. The evidence that changed everything for the brothers wasn't discovered by detectives. It was a letter Erik wrote in 1988 when he was 16 years old to his cousin Andy Cano, describing, in his own handwriting, what he said his father was doing to him. Cano testified about the abuse at trial, but the letter itself, the actual physical evidence, wasn't found until years later, after Cano had already died. It surfaced publicly in a 2015 Barbara Walters television special. The brothers' own trial attorneys never had it. A 16-year-old's handwriting, sitting unread for decades, saying the thing everyone would later spend 35 years arguing about. 1993. The first trial was televised, one of the earliest cases to turn a courtroom into a national broadcast. America watched the brothers testify in detail about the abuse. The jury split. Some jurors leaned toward manslaughter, believing at least a partial self-defense claim. Others leaned toward murder. The result was a hung jury, mistrial. 1995. The second trial had a different judge and a different ruling on what the jury would be allowed to hear. Most of the abuse testimony that had shaped the first trial was excluded this time. The jury saw a narrower story, with far less context for what the brothers said had happened to them inside that house. In 1996, both brothers were convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. They were separated, housed in different California prisons, hundreds of miles apart. Over the following 3 decades, 5 separate appellate courts reviewed that conviction. All 5 upheld it. By every legal measure available at the time, the case was closed. So what do you do with a life sentence and no legal path out? Erik founded at least 5 programs inside prison, including a hospice and support initiative for elderly and disabled inmates, a template other facilities would later adopt. Both brothers earned degrees. Corrections officers, the people with the least reason to flatter an inmate, wrote letters describing their conduct as remarkable. At the 2025 resentencing hearing, Judge Michael Jezik said he was equally shocked reading those letters, that what the brothers had built over 3 decades was extraordinary by any standard the system usually applies. Before the parole board could consider releasing them, there was one question 35 years of incarceration had never fully settled. Had the brothers actually accepted full responsibility for the murders, or were they still, in some form, arguing self-defense? And could a person do both at once? Hold that question. It's the one that would ultimately decide everything. September 2024. Ryan Murphy's Monsters, The Lyle and Erik Menendez story premieres on Netflix. Millions of viewers who had no memory of the original trial suddenly had an opinion on it. Petitions circulated. Family members who had supported the brothers quietly for years started speaking publicly. Worth sitting with honestly. Should a true crime miniseries move a 35-year-old legal outcome? The parole board itself would later raise that exact question out loud. October 2024, then District Attorney George Gascon formally recommended resentencing, citing the brothers' rehabilitation record. May 13, 2025, Judge Jezik granted it. New sentence, 50 years to life. The brothers, appearing virtually from prison, both told the court they took full responsibility for the murders. Erik said there was no excuse for what he'd done. Lyle said that if he'd trusted others to help him at the time, none of it would have happened. The new district attorney, Nathan Hochman, opposed the resentencing. His argument: the brothers couldn't simultaneously accept full responsibility for murder and continue to describe the killings as self-defense. To Hochman, that wasn't nuance, it was a contradiction, a false narrative the jury had already rejected decades earlier. Resolving where we left off, the judge sided with the brothers. Accepting responsibility for taking 2 lives and believing at the time that those lives threatened yours are not mutually exclusive claims in Jezik's reading. The resentencing stood. For the first time in 30 years, parole was legally back on the table. August 21st and 22nd, 2025, 2 separate hearings at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. Erik's ran 10 hours. Lyle's ran 11. Both brothers sat alone in front of a screen with correctional officers behind them, while commissioners, attorneys, and family members appeared virtually. The board did not dismiss what the brothers had built. Commissioner Julie Garland told Lyle directly that his remorse looked genuine, that in many ways he'd been a model inmate. But she also pointed to what she called antisocial personality traits, deception, minimization, rule breaking, that she said persisted beneath that positive surface. Both brothers had incurred cell phone violations in prison, Lyle's in late 2024, Erik's earlier. Garland's reasoning was blunt. People who break rules inside are statistically more likely to break rules outside. Both were denied. Both are eligible to reapply in 3 years, the earliest interval California law allows. Kitty Menendez's own sister, Joan Anderson Vander Molen, had publicly supported their release, saying the world wasn't ready in the 1990s to believe that boys could be raped, and that today it is. 24 Menendez relatives, people who are legally counted as victims of this crime themselves, gathered to advocate for the brothers. The board said no anyway. After the parole denial, 2 paths to freedom technically remained open. One of them ran through the courts. The other ran through the governor's office. One of those 2 paths has since closed. Resolving the last hook, the brothers' attorneys had filed a habeas corpus petition back in 2023, asking for a new trial based on the 2 pieces of evidence that didn't exist at either original trial: Roy Rossello's allegation and Erik's 1988 letter. In September 2025, Los Angeles Superior Court Judge William Ryan denied that petition. His ruling was specific. The new evidence, he wrote, slightly corroborates that the brothers were abused, but doesn't come close to undoing the jury's finding of premeditation and lying in wait. Not compelling enough, in his words, to have created reasonable doubt in even one juror's mind. The brothers can appeal that ruling. As of now, that appeal is where things stand. Which leaves one door still open: clemency, from Governor Gavin Newsom. His office has said the application remains active. Newsom has used this power before, both for and against release, in cases far more politically charged than most. He's also said publicly that he deliberately avoided watching the Netflix series that reignited this entire case, specifically so it couldn't shape a decision that might eventually land on his desk. No decision has been announced. The earliest the parole board can hear this case again is 2028. Lyle will be 60. Erik will be 57. Jose and Kitty Menendez were killed in their own living room in 1989 by their two sons. That part of this story was never in question. Not in 1993, not in 1996, not today. What 35 years of trials, appeals, a resentencing, 2 parole hearings, and a denied habeas petition never actually settled is the harder question underneath it. Whether what happened inside that house before that night changes the meaning of what happened after it. Whether a person who spends 3.5 decades proving, in documented and verifiable ways, that they are not who they were, whether that person has actually earned something back. Or whether some acts are heavy enough that no amount of time changes what they weigh. The parole board said no in August of 2025. The victim's own sister said yes. Both of them were looking at the same 35 years. If this case made you think, tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want the next full breakdown, it's already up.